Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Once again, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martijn te Pas. I'm based in Stockholm. I'm a programmer for Nordisk Panorama and a consultant, documentary consultant. And I'm extremely proud to introduce to you the fantastic doc talk, the second doc talk of the Cannes Festival, the Cannes Market. And I'm really proud that É Tudo Verdade, I hope I pronounce it well, It's All True, is a partner of Marché du Film. And they're here, and we're extremely proud that they are here. It's the first time from this online edition. First, I'd like to introduce Amir Labaki. Most of you probably know him. He's the founder, director of It's All True since 25 years. This year they celebrated their 25th anniversary, and they will do so a second time later this year. With him, the co-moderator is Anna Glogowski, programmer, consultant, moderator, film connoisseur, even an ex-director of a festival as well for a while. And of course, they will introduce their very distinguished guests, Petra Costa and Andrés Di Tella, much better than I do. Just a little message for you. There is a button below, the Q&A button. You can hit that and ask your questions there, but they will not be answered before the last 15 minutes. So 6:15, local Central European time, then the questions will be answered. The session will be available later in the app, in the Match and Meet app by Talk. And for now, I will briefly come back at the end, but for now, of course, I give the virtual microphone to Amir Labaki. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Allow me to start with a few words of gratitude. I want to thank Pierre-Alexis and all the Cannes Docs team for kindly embracing It's All True as a new festival partner, a new member of the Cannes Docs family. It's a privilege and an honor. I want to thank also the It's All True team that has worked hard and remotely, as everybody is doing, to make possible this partnership, especially Monica Guimarães, Daniela Wassenstein, and Luis Felipe Labaki. They are all with us in the Cannes Docs, and you wanted to meet one of them, of us, just send us a message. I want to thank Anna Glogowski. She's a kind of a godmother of this partnership, and we are very proud, Anna, that you are here with us as a co-moderator of this talk. We had our guests, a dream team we had. In a way, you have Messi and Marta talking about soccer. They don't need further introductions, but I will try just a couple of words about them. Andrés Di Tella is one of the leading Argentinian filmmakers from the post-military dictatorship period of the 70s and 80s, with more than 10 features docs made in around 25 years. His work is one of the lighthouses of the Latin American cinema in the 21st century. I'm not just the one saying this. There is a full book published in the beginning of the century by Paulo Paranaguá, a film critic that lives in Paris, a Brazilian film critic that lives in Paris. This is the book, Cine Documental in America Latina, documentary cinema in Latin America. And in this book, Paranaguá selects 13 of the leading documentary filmmakers in Latin America in all time. And Andrés Di Tella is the last one on the list. This is the guy. He was a pioneer in developing autobiographical documentaries in a region in which a much stronger tradition of historic docs was established. The Television and I from 2002 is one of the most innovative non-fictional films ever made in Latin America. He followed it with titles as Photographies, The Devil's Country, 327 Notebooks, and last year with Private Fiction. He presented us his last film that it was a premiere at the San Sebastian Film Festival. Petra Costa is the first Latin American documentarist to receive an Oscar nomination for feature documentary. As everybody knows, For the Edge of Democracy just her third feature film. I think everybody knows that In the Edge of Democracy is on Netflix. You can watch it if you haven't done it yet on Netflix. In the Edge of Democracy, she narrates the intersections between her personal and family lives, particularly and the recent history of Brazilian democracy, particularly the history of the rise and fall of the Workers' Party to power. Workers' Party that was led by Luiz Inácio and is led by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. However, first film, Helena, from 2012, about her late sister, was already a breakthrough, combining experimental and autobiographical elements. Our theme today is history to me, the autobiographical political trend in Latin American docs. And it would be impossible to start it better than asking a question to Andrés Di Tella. Dear Andrés, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. I want to start asking about something you once told me. You said that Montoneros, a film that you made in the late 90s, your second feature, was the one that gave you a breakthrough, a narrative breakthrough. You were telling about the fact that before the autobiographical trend in your films, you discovered the subjectivity of the character as a tool for telling the story. In the case of Montoneros, I think you assumed the subjectivity of Anna, a former guerrillera, to present the story of the Montoneros, moving away from any pretension of neutrality as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, as a documentarist. Would you elaborate a little bit about this, the importance of first discovering the subjectivity and then going to autobiography?
Yes, thank you, Amir. It's a great pleasure to share this whatever it is that we are on Zoom screen or with Petra and you. And I really, for me, É Tudo Verdade has been a very important festival as a showcase for my films and also as a gathering point for many of us Latin American filmmakers who often used to meet only in Europe. And I think the festivals such as É Tudo Verdade help to create a kind of community, which is very important. So yes, I think that film, which was called in Spanish Montoneros Una Historia, was a kind of tricky title because it told the story of the Montoneros, but it was just one story, one individual story. And it was this Anna Testa, who was not especially important. I had met other people who had more extreme stories, more spectacular, more important in a way. But I think this nobody, in a way, allowed me, myself, as a young documentary filmmaker, to put myself into Anna. In a way, it was a kind of transference of myself. I lived through her, and she was the narrator of the film. And so later, doing other work, sometimes for television, I came upon this kind of brick wall that was, you were supposed to hide the fact that the documentary is not a window to the world, but it is actually somebody looking through that window. This was supposed to be in the tradition of American direct cinema, which had enormous influence, of course, was the rule in a way. And I found it very frustrating because often in a documentary, what is actually happening, what is actually being registered by the camera and the microphone is this encounter between the filmmaking team or represented by the filmmaker, which I think it's also something that has to be said, that often these films that are first person, individual, autobiographical are actually made by a team. And in a way, this first person is a kind of construct. It's a character. It's a little bit of fiction in that. It is based on me behind the camera, but it's not just me. So this is something, yes, I discovered, okay, I used in a way Ana Testa in Montoneros Una Historia as a vehicle. And I was doing this film, which was a kind of experimental research into the history of television, which turned out to be the film you mentioned. Many years later, it took me like 6 years. Ooh. And it was just a disaster. It was bits and pieces that couldn't gel. And I even dropped it completely. And then I started directing the Bafisi Film Festival, which you were one of the first guests, Amir. And so for a couple of years, I rested that film. And then I took it up again and realized that all these pieces actually represented my own failure as a researcher, as a documentary maker. And I thought maybe for once, the failure is more important than the success. Often documentary, I finish with this, documentary filmmakers will bring back from the hunt the best trophies, the best heads of deer or the greatest hits. And sometimes that is a lie. And there's 90% are failures. So this film really is about a failure. My own failure as a documentary filmmaker, and about the failure of a national project, which was an industrialized nation that Argentina, maybe some people in Argentina wanted it to become, and that was represented by my grandfather in this story.
Thank you. Think about grandfathers and grandmothers. The very first film that our dear Petra directed was a short film about her maternal grandfather and grandfather and mother, Olhos de Ressaca from 2009. Again in Helena and in the Edge of Democracy, the focus closed on Petra, her story, her family story, her voice, her body. I'd like to ask you, dear, a bit about the influence you had on developing from the start with this autobiographical narration that marks 3 of your 4 films. Are there any filmmakers, any writers, particular films that you felt you were developing from them when you start making your films?
Well, first, thank you so much for this invitation, Amir, Anna, and the CAN team. The work that Amir and Anna have been doing over the decades with É Tudo Verdade not only introduced so many of my generation into documentary filmmaking, but made us dream that it was possible to make documentaries. So it's an immense contribution. And Andrés, whose work I have become familiar recently and have plunged into it and have gained an immense admiration. It's really an honor to be here. Well, I came into the idea of making or investigating autobiographical themes, not so much through cinema, much later in cinema, actually, because I started in theater and in theater explorations that were very much about investigating into oneself. I mean, very inspired by the living theater in the United States that came to Brazil and here through Teatro da Vertigem, Tó, Antônio Araújo, and these idea of workshopping scenes by trying to find that which you were most reluctant to show, what you were most ashamed of in your own personal experience. And in doing that, I did a scene once that was mixing parts of my diary with the diaries of Helena, my sister, who had committed suicide much earlier when she was 20 and I was 7. And at that moment, I was 18 and had found a diary of hers that was from her that same age, 18 years old. And it was very uncanny experience to read those diaries, because it's as if she was speaking of my own experience, and not only did we have the same anxieties, the same sadnesses, but also the same parents. So the uncanny sensation of having my present written for me and possibly my future. And I was very intrigued by that material. And at that moment, I promised myself that I would try to get someone to one day make a film about this material. I never thought that I would be able to make a film. And that idea was kept in my mind. And then I went into studying anthropology. And in anthropology, what Andrés has been speaking about, not looking through the window, but who is looking through the window, is very present, right? The whole questioning of objectivity as a colonial legacy that can be very oppressive, and how important it is to put into evidence who is looking and from where he is looking or she is looking, to deconstruct the oppressiveness that a colonial ethnography had exercised for decades. So through anthropology that I entered into documentary filmmaking, because I started to film my ethnographies. And at first I tried to film these ethnographies in a very objective way, even though I was reading about all the questions with that. It took a while for me to be able to find the inspiration to look at something that was very intimate, which were my grandparents. And I think at that moment I had already seen the work of Chris Marker, which had deeply influenced me and his essay films, and would later see Agnès Varda, Alain René, and I think their works were the works that most made me want to make films. Their questioning of memory, their questioning the entrance of a very self-questioning subjectivity that plays with time and narrative in such a free way was something that really touched me. And only much later would I see more autobiographical works per se of David Perlov and others, but at that time I think the most autobiographical work I had actually seen was The Beaches of Agnès, which was very inspired, because I think no one has dared so much in a film as to put herself even inside the belly of a whale. So everything became possible after seeing that film. I think Anna is trying to say something.
Anna? We cannot listen to you, Anna.
Can you see my question?
Now, yes. Great, thank you.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I had a question listening to Petra, because when we move further in your work, we get to Edge of Democracy. And in the film, you give us an explanation of where you start from. It's always interesting to know why someone does a film. And you say, I realized democracy was in danger, and that democracy had your age. Democracy in Brazil had your age. And at what point do you decide that you would tell this story through your family story? How did you decide that although the story of your family, of course, is related to democracy, but at what point did you decide that Dilma's being kicked out, the story was to be told through the story of your family?
Yes. Well, at first, I had seen the Battle of Chile a few months before everything had happened, and through the Battle of Chile, I understood that we were reliving the past, and that those protests that were taking shape in Brazil, asking for Dilma's impeachment, I came to see for myself that they were very fascist protests, and had the urgency of documenting it because I had seen Battle of Chile very much so, and wanted through Battle of Chile not only to follow one character. At one point I thought, oh, if I could follow Lula or Dilma, but it was very important for me to be in the streets, to be in the Congress, to be in the presidential palace, to try to have Brazil as a whole, kind of its temperature and its pulse. And then at one point I tried to write objective, sorry, my dog.
The dog.
I tried to write an objective voiceover because there were facts that needed to be known to be able to enter the story. And it felt very alien to me. And at one point, after this first attempt, I started thinking, I had re-seen Roger and Me by Michael Moore, and which I made me, La Televisión y Yo made me think about Roger and Me a lot too. And watching Roger and Me, immediately came the sentence to me that democracy and I had the same age. And I remembered even the archival footage I had of my first birthday party, and how I could start the film with that, and how it was exactly what I wanted to talk about, because I only later perceived that what interested me in the story was a citizen's relation to his or her own democracy, and the sensation of grief and trauma that occurs when you notice that what you took for granted, what you took for certain, what I took as a birthright, which was Brazilian democracy, was crumbling underneath my feet. And there's a very intense sensation of betrayal and vertigo in that process. I woke up with vertigo every day throughout the year of filming. Nausea, really. It was something that touched me physically, and that's why the compulsion to make the film and to try to understand what was happening, because since the beginning the entire experience was very, very visceral and disturbing, and the film was almost a way of surviving it. And then when I looked at the wall that was being built in the day of Dilma's impeachment, the other voiceover that is in the film came to me that, yes, my entire family would be on the right side of that wall asking for Dilma's impeachment, had it not been a mutation that occurred in '64 when my father went to the United States and came back with leftist dreams to Brazil. And the contradiction of having heard many times that in that same year, 1964, my grandparents and their parents became desperate because they thought that after the speech of Jango, where the president at the time, who said he was going to declare agrarian reform, tax the great fortunes, and do very necessary reforms for Brazil to even become a capitalist country. But the irony was that the capitalists, in this case my ancestors, thought that with this they would lose their land, So they became desperate and started to plan how to escape, how to move to California. And for me, that scene encompasses so much of the contradictions of Brazil, that specific scene. And so I was sure that I wanted to talk about that, how the contradiction of on one side, these two parents that dream of a revolution and grandparents that want to flee the country as soon as any declaration or attempt at social reforms is made. And it's out of these contradictions that went to sleep for a very long time, I think, from the end of the 80s until 2010, 11, these contradictions went to sleep and woke up very potentialized and in 2013. And that's what the film wanted to explore.
Anna, before you ask a question to Andrés, let me do it again. Andrés, first of all, we are talking about two films, Montoneros and the television and I, that our audience can watch at YouTube. It's important for them to know that. If they don't know your work, some of your films, they can find them at YouTube, especially these two, Montoneros and the television and I. And I was saying in the introduction that last year you released but we can classify as the third film of a trilogy, of an autobiographical trilogy, because you started, you put yourself and your father and your grandfather and to fix that television, the television and I. A couple of years later, you did a film about your mother and your and her relation towards India, that is photographies. And now, last year, you did a film about your father and your mother, that is private fiction. It's very interesting. It was very interesting for me watching the film to see that for telling that story, you decided to use actors. You are not just using archival material like we can see in the other films, but you are working with actors. I know that you have even each written and spoken here in Brazil and in other in your classes, that everybody that is in front of a camera in documentary, they are actors. They are in a way acting. But my question is, first, why did you decide to use a little more of fiction in your film, calling it even fiction, private fiction? And if it was different for you to shoot with actors and to shoot with non-actors?
Yes, it's funny because when you're used to working in documentary with non-actors who anyway, as you say very well, somehow become actors, because we are all, like right now, we are acting as kind of filmmakers who have a lot of things to say, which if I were just talking to my kids or my wife even, that would be, I would have to play a different role. So we all play little roles in life. But the funny thing about actors is, if you're coming for documentaries, that you're trying to register how people are reacting or in situations that are ongoing. An actor actually asks you what you want. As Petra will know very well. And I didn't know. So this was disconcerting for the actors, but so I had to give them a lot of trust in what their intuitions were, and that was actually what I was interested in. So I was working with actors as a documentary filmmaker, and they were reading these letters that my parents, Kamala and Torquato, wrote to each other from the 1950s to the 1970s, that my father gave to me almost 20 years ago when my mother died, but I really wasn't able to read until very recently when my own father died. And then it was a time to read them. And I gave these letters to these young actors who, one of them was a student of mine, and they were actually a couple themselves. And I thought they were, on the one hand, they evoke the youth of my parents when they wrote these letters. And also it was a connection to today. You know, it was actually, for me, documentary is very important that it is happening now. This is the rule, number one rule of documentary. It is happening now. I think I learned this from Eduardo Coutinho. It is happening now. And all that exists is what is happening now. If it's something from the past, it's a memory that is happening now. And so they were reading these letters, and in a way they embodied my parents, although they were completely different. You know, my parents weren't artists. My father was a sociologist, historian, my mother a psychologist. But they were, in a way, in the vanguard. They were breaking limits by the very fact of being a mixed race couple in the 1950s, which was rather strange and in fact, in many places outlawed. You know, before Rosa Parks refused to get up from her seat on the bus. You know, all these things somehow today become extremely more relevant than they were maybe 2 years ago. But they were always relevant to anybody who is not white, you know. So this was part of the reason, and I think I recognize this in the title, Private Fiction is... but I would just like to add that I think the whole idea of putting yourself or your family or your autobiographical elements in a documentary film, which when I began with La Televisión y Yo, in a Latin American context, was really, some people thought, well, who does he think he is, you know, to talk about himself and his family. But really, I think that it's just a vehicle. Like I mentioned, my character and friend, Ana Testa from Montoneros, Una Historia. She was a vehicle for me in a way, but basically for the audience. So the spectator can travel, have his own or her own emotional journey through the filmmaker. The filmmaker offers, in a way, his own body, his own voice, as a way of entry. So the spectators can identify in a way. So I think in private fiction, what happens is that you have just these bits of fragments of letters from my parents, which are like the tip of the iceberg, you know. And so the audience is faced with the tip of the iceberg of my parents' lives, which do not fit in film. Like nobody's life really fits in a film. So they have to imagine the rest, that is the huge block of ice that is below the surface, invisible. They have to imagine it from that tip of the iceberg. And how do they do that? How do they imagine it? Through their own emotions, their own experience, their own feelings, maybe about their parents. So that's what, to me, the autobiographical serves as a function in the documentary.
Anna?
Yeah, I was very moved also by your sincereness in expressing your doubts. Mainly in La Televisión y Yo, you are disappointed with not having been able to go further in your initial film, and you go very far in your accusing yourself for not doing the right thing, and in a way questioning. So we feel really sorry. Oh my God! So when do you decide that you are going to put so much of your own doubts and of your disappointments? Is it during the editing, or is it something that you decide when you start thinking of the film or of the subject?
No, well, in the case of television and it was clearly, as I said before, in a way, is the only way I could piece those fragments together was through my own experience, telling my own experience of making the film. Of course, made into a kind of story, but all the same, it was. And also, I thought it was slightly comical, you know, this person who just doesn't know what he's doing. And this idea, which may sound strange, to me is like my mantra. I don't know what I'm doing. The moment I know what I'm doing, I should be suspecting, what am I doing?
But you could keep it for yourself and you'll tell us everything. All your secrets.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the what you have to do it if you're going to use yourself, if you're going to be a personal narrator, you have to show weakness, you have to show fragility, you have to show vulnerability. And I mean, Petra was talking just now about Agnès Varda. For me, for instance, The Gleaners and I, where she shows her gray hair and her hands are aging. This is just so generous because it helps us to accept the way we are. So for me, that it's very feminine in a way, I have to say. And I think Petra's films are full of that too, which what makes them very singular. Because, you know, political films tend to be very kind of macho. and I think Petra's found some other way of talking about politics.
It's interesting because watching Andrés' films, it made me remind a lot of something Edmundo Desnoyes says. Edmundo Desnoyes, the writer of Memories of Underdevelopment by Gutierrez Alea, that the Latin American cinema has been historically so overcharged by exterior reality and brute superficial surfaces, and with a lot of the certainty of Don Quixote and very little of the self-doubt and the ambiguity of Hamlet. And I think what all of Andrés' films that I saw, and I saw Fotografias, Televisión y Yo, y Ficción Privada, have this Hamletian spirit of self-doubt very present. And if we were to agree with Edmundo, it's exactly what Latin America needs.
I have my skull here.
Taking from something that Petra was telling us before, I have a curiosity about the process of filmmaking of your films, particularly of these autobiographical films. Andrés was telling us how the impact of the direct cinema in the 50s, this is the cinema verité, and one of the changings in filmmaking, in documentary filmmaking, that came from direct cinema was a very heavy criticism to voice over and to narration. In this century, in 2001 and in the 2000s, the last 20 years, narration came back, and mostly narration came back to documentary through this autobiographical trend. What I'd like to ask you both is about the process in your films. When you decide to do Elena or La Televisión y Yo or Fotografias, for instance, do you start writing a first narration, even knowing that you are going to change it later on? or if you just write during the editing process in dialogue with the images that you got? How it works for you? What's the process? Do you write first, should make the film, and then rewrite it again, or you just start writing when you are already editing the films? Petra and Andrés, both.
Well, for me with Elena, I had a lot of, initially I had the idea that the film would have voiceover, but I was so insecure to write it. I was full of self-doubt. And so I decided to film and interview everyone who knew her, because I felt I needed to know more about her. And we started to edit, trying to edit just this external material. And it was why, and the editor, who is a great editor, De La Creta, immediately said that most of the interviews were irrelevant, that the only interviews that really mattered were those of my parents. And she focused on that, and immediately it became clear that my voiceover was needed. So I was forced to write it, but I really resisted. And so I only started writing it really during the editing process. They stopped for a while, and I just wrote, and then I invited a friend, Carolina Ziskinji, to write with me and review what I had written. So it was only during the editing. In Democracia em Vertigem, in The Edge of Democracy, I was writing a lot while I was filming, kind of diary-like impressions during the time of filming. And before I even sat to edit, I tried to write everything I could, which wasn't much, but was kind of at the heart of the kind of vortexes of the spinal cord. And only then did I go into the edit room, because I felt the edit would just consume me and I would forget my subjective experience. Yeah. But then I kept writing until the last day of mix.
Of course.
Yeah.
Andrés?
Yeah, for me it's similar, I think, to what Petra's saying. Each film I make, I swear I will not use voiceover. And then it happens that it's a solution. I always make films that kind of crash into the wall, and then I have to pick up the pieces. And I use whatever instrument I have at hand to pick up the pieces. And yes, the voiceover often is one of them, but it has a price. I think that's has a price. You can't just use it. You have to give your pound of meat, libra de carne. No? You have
But do you write beforehand a first draft when you're starting the film, or not? Or you just write?
Yeah, I'm writing all the time. I mean,
yeah,
all the time. I don't stop. It just but most of the actual writing that will remain in the film will be done simultaneous to the editing process, because there I am beginning to understand what I went through, what I managed to register, and what is needed to make sense of that material.
Okay. Well, we are approaching the end. We have 10 minutes more. I want to invite you, everybody that's watching, if they want to use the Q&A button to send us questions. We have one here from Jessica Dogner. Petra, it's quite curious. She says, Petra mentioned the Living Theatre, and I am a current member of the Living Theatre, as the Living Theatre lives on. I am also a documentary filmmaker, and often have felt that somehow the participatory theatre holds the same participatory intentions of documentary film. They could be very powerful when combined. I'm curious about where these two realms, participatory theater and documentary, can meet in XR. And if you've seen this being done.
What is XR?
XR is virtual, using this new technology, I think, with virtual reality and shooting, and that you can have the impression that you are seeing in 3D, 360 degrees. We have I think we have an XR, a VR competition here at the Marché du Film this year. You know, to use this new technology that allows you to have a quite of immersive experience, because you put at glasses and what you see and what you hear are almost if you are facing the experience. Like Andrés is saying, it's
devil.
mad. It's a mad world. They're using, I think what she meant, Jessica meant, was that using these new technologies could approach the participatory theater and documentary.
Well, I have in normal cinema, I think Peter Brook did some very interesting experiences mixing theater with film. I particularly love his film US, about the reflections on the Vietnam War, and also Marat Sad, where he was working with the Royal Shakespeare Company, I believe. And my own film, Alma and the Seagull, was also an attempt at working through with theater, like having theater dictate the film. And I was working with two actors from the Théâtre du Soleil, and we worked as a theater troupe, workshopping every scene through improvisation. But in terms of virtual reality, I've seen some at Sundance in 2018 when The Edge of Democracy released. I saw some very interesting VR experiences. One was Traveling While Black, by Roger Ross Williams, I believe. It used the sensation of proximity very well to explore the theme of racism and the Jim Crow law and the segregation, the physical question of segregation, which could never be explored in the same way in a cinema, because you are put in the place of the Black person, even if you are white. So that was very interesting. But I think there's still so much to explore. I'm fascinated by virtual reality. The little I have experienced it's quite amazing.
I think there's something like a destiny. They had to meet theater and documentary, and I think it's no coincidence that one of the last films of the great Eduardo Coutinho was a very misunderstood film that was about theater, about a company making their rehearsals of a Chekhov play.
Yeah, Moscow.
And I think this has to do with what we talked at the beginning, you know, about people, even in a documentary, real people somehow are acting. So Coutinho,
and he explores that in Jogo de Cena masterfully.
Yes, so I think there is a connection there that needs to be explored even further. That Coutinho, as always, was many years ahead of the rest of us, but it needs to be explored. Not necessarily, I think, just through cinema.
We have just 5 minutes more. I need to ask you both. I need to ask you, Petra and Andrés. What are you working on now? What are, even being both of you in isolation, what are you doing? I know Petra started a project that is related to the pandemic. I know that Andrés has always keeping two or three balls in the air, making. Then I would like to ask you to, in 1.5 minutes, each one of you to tell us what are you doing now. Petra, ladies first.
No, please, Andrés.
Well, as Amir says, I'm juggling many balls. One is a project that I hope to be able to go out and film someday. It's about the Pampas, La Pampa, the vast region of Argentina that is somehow at the core of our identity and has been completely forgotten. So this is one big project. It's kind of road trip sort of project. And the other is something that I started last summer, making small cell phone diaries. So I made like 7 or 8 already. This was before the pandemic. And in the middle of the pandemic, I thought, oh God, everybody's doing this. But I continued. I don't know what will happen. It's many, many short films.
Yes, we've been filming what has been happening in Brazil since the beginning of the pandemic, and also the political crisis that never ends. And what has been interesting is to see how we're living in a kind of post-state country, in a way where there's no state and there's no Ministry of Health, and how the amazing ability of so many communities to organize themselves and to survive in this stateless, dystopic situation. And it's very disheartening, at the same time inspiring to see their strength. It's a film that is much less in the palaces as the Edge was, but much more in the peripheries, and which are the places that are being the most affected. But
this is the same film that you called the working title was Dystopia.
Yes.
And that you invited filmmakers from all over the world to send you clips, right?
Exactly. But we're also filming ourselves. I mean, we have some few collaborators that have been filming more intensely.
And the idea is to combine this let's call it this anonymous footage, this footage from amateur filmmakers, and the footage that you are doing, and with your crew nowadays during the pandemic in Brazil. Is that
exactly. It? Yes. The balance or the proportions is still unknown.
And the idea is to focus in Brazil or to focus in Brazil. The material you're asking for, then if you are an international. You don't need to send your clip to Petra if you are not shooting in Brazil. Let's make it clear. Yes, if you're shooting in Brazil, yes, send it to Petra. If not, then and the working title is Dystopia. Yes, right?
Dystopia with a Y. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just a little crazy about one of the balls that I know Andrés is keeping on the air. And because he made a wonderful film when he was starting to make about Macedonia, Hernandez with Ricardo Piglia, and then he made the film about Ricardo Piglia, 227 notebooks, and it was published by the press that you were preparing a film about Jorge Luis Borges, just one of the most important writers we ever had in Latin America. Tell us a bit, what are you going to do? Because with Piglia was alive, and you're shooting and you have the notebooks. Borges is quite a phantom. It's a ghost. It's someone that you have interviews with him, of course, but he's at the same time, he's a monument. He's somebody that it's not easy to approach a guy like that. Tell us a bit about Borges.
Well, yeah, all of this is what makes it difficult, but there's a wonderful text by Borges that is slipped into a book of poems almost unseen, that is called Borges y yo, Borges and I. Mm-hmm. And he talks about this, you know, a writer tries to create his own voice. That's one of what a writer is doing. But this voice becomes a kind of Frankenstein that takes over. So this is the Borges text. And I'm taking that as a title, Borges y yo. And so it's, again, fragments that are connected. And something that has not been addressed so much is Borges and politics, the politics of Argentina specifically, but also Nazism, fascism. Borges wrote a lot about that, more than people think. And he did a lot of things as well. So that's very controversial often and changing. So that will be part of that project, yes, which I'm writing right now.
Great. Well, I see that Martin is back. Yes. What means it's over. I just want to again to say thanks to Candice Docs, to everybody, to all the team, to it's a true team. Tell you that yes, we had, as everybody, each or two was hit by the pandemics when we are starting the celebration, 10 days before we are open the festival. Then we already did our first part, an online festival with retrospectives and special screenings. It was a big hit. We had Martin more an audience larger than we had last year in our presidential festival already in this first part. And then late September, beginning of October, we are presenting, we are organizing in São Paulo and Rio the presidential film festival with the competitions and the international documentary conference. Then it will be late September, early October. And thank you so much to Candice Doc, Anna, Petra, Andrés, Martin.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was a very, very inspiring discussion. Really great. Thanks to you, Petra and Andrés, and of course, Amir, Anna. But I also like to thank the Marché du Film itself, Candox and Pierre-Alexis Chevit and Jeffrey Garot for this talk. And hopefully see you soon for some other talks, doc talks during this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure.